writer of curriculum and author. Please welcome Ms. Lutheran.
Hello, everyone. Just first of all, congratulations. This is session 12, the last sectional. I don't know if you felt this way, but there was so much great information, so many good ideas to chew on and take back to homes and schools. I hope that this presentation isn't overwhelming. I want it to be a beautiful, quiet reflection for us today, where we can just enjoy beauty, the beauty as a gift from God, take it in, share resources, and share with one another at the end. Quote, like her sisters, truth and goodness, beauty has also been mistreated and shunned by this materialistic secular age. With few exceptions, artists openly defy her, while architects no longer strive to please her. Others strive for fame and originality while openly embracing ugliness and nihilism. But even though society tries to turn away from beauty as it plunges deeper and deeper into barbarism, ordinary people still thirst for her. The world's greatest cathedrals are filled with tourists. Massive crowds flock to art museums filled with religious painting, and there is perpetual demand for the music of Bach and Beethoven. It seems that as our age becomes uglier, so that beauty is even more openly marginalized, she becomes more important, more necessary than ever, end quote. So writes the Reverend Adam Cornell in an article entitled Toward a Lutheran Theology of Beauty in issue 11 of Christian Culture, a magazine for Lutherans. Cornell touches on a vital point for educators today. Beauty is often overlooked in our homes and schools, whether intentionally or not. As classical educators, we are intentional about truth and goodness, but sometimes beauty gets pragmatically pushed aside. As Lutherans who understand that all true beauty is from our Lord, we've been given a precious stewardship to share beauty with our children and students. Sometimes teaching can feel more like a nurse performing triage. You may feel overwhelmed with standards, whether they're from the state, the school, or yourself. And there are never-ending lessons to plan, papers to grade, classrooms to clean. There's religion, reading, literature, history, science, mathematics, and sometimes even Latin. But in the words of Sarah Mackenzie in Teaching from Rest, quote, what if instead of trying to make the most of our time, we worked harder at saving it? What if we were more intentional and lavish with our time and more detached from our checklists? What if we viewed each child not as a project to be managed, but as a soul to be cultivated? This doesn't mean that we aren't planning ahead, and it definitely doesn't mean that we're lazy. It means we're doing one thing at a time, and we do that thing with all our heart, end quote. The purpose of this session is to encourage each educator here to carve out time daily to reflect upon and receive the great works of Western art and music. We'll briefly discuss a philosophy of beauty, brainstorm specifics for building a morning meeting that will work for your students, and share practical resources for implementing that vision. Finally, before we dismiss for Vespers, we'll join in a discussion to support one another in a daily dose of beauty. First, a philosophy of beauty. We'll discuss the thoughts of the ancients on beauty, marvel at how all beauty is from the Creator, and reflect upon the objectivity of true beauty. As an aside, when I refer to art in this presentation, I mean the arts in a broad sense: music, visual art, poetry, etc. Author Stratford Caldecott, a Roman Catholic, published a fascinating book several years back entitled Beauty for Truth's Sake. I'll be sharing several quotations from this book throughout the hour. As a classical educator, Caldecott explains, quote, the key to the ancient codification of the 7 liberal arts was the concept of beauty as cosmic order, in order that is simultaneously aesthetic, harmonious, symbolic, mathematical, and sacramental. He goes on, at the heart of any culture worthy of the name is not work, but leisure. Skole, in Greek, a word that lies at the roots of the English word school. And probably you've heard that in another session this week. At its highest, leisure is contemplation. It is an activity that is its own justification, the pure expression of what it means to be human. It is what we do. The purpose of the quadrivium was to prepare us to contemplate God in an ordered fashion, to take delight in all truth, beauty, and goodness. End quote. We can see in these quotations that while beauty is a trifecta with goodness and truth, it is also closely related to both education and creation. In fact, the medieval mind considered art to be God's grandchild. God created man, man created art, therefore, art is the grandchild of God. In his book, Serpents in the Classroom, Dr. Thomas Korchak describes the relationship between classical education, beauty, and God. Quote, the ancient Greeks looked at the universe as a unified whole designed to draw one closer to God. By understanding the interconnectedness of all things, a person could begin to grasp the things of God. Medieval Christian teachers continued in this tradition. Truth, goodness, and beauty were worth learning because they were expressions of the oneness of God. Goodness described what God was like, but so did beauty and truth. There wasn't a multiplicity of truths or goods or beauties any more than there was a multiplicity of gods. While they are distinct, the three were intertwined. Truth interpreted beauty and goodness. Goodness gave insight into truth and beauty beauty informed truth and goodness. Each described one aspect of the whole. It was similar to the way the Athanasian Creed describes the Trinity. End quote. As such, we can see that not only is beauty a gift from God, it is a reflection of God himself and cannot be separated from truth and goodness. Absorbing and reflecting on beauty fits naturally with a classical Lutheran education. Nor is beauty some postmodern concept that cannot be analyzed or understood. Instead, beauty is objective and teachable. Aristotle posited that beauty was directly related to order, symmetry, and proportion, none of which is subjective. Different areas of art, or eras of art, architecture, and music, have ordered their tools and media differently than one another, but they have used symmetry and balance, in different ways. But beauty is design, not accident. Stratford Caldecott describes a number of questions one might ask when deciding between two objects to find which is more beautiful, including which of these two objects would you rather present to God? Or which of these two objects would you rather possess for eternity? He also argues, quote, who will not admit that harmony is more beautiful than dissonance, health more beautiful than sickness, kindness more beautiful than cruelty? If you push the postmodern relativist, you will almost certainly be able to get an admission that he would prefer to look up at a gorgeous sunset than down into the latrine. End quote. When considered in that light, we find that perhaps beauty is not simply in the eye of the beholder after all. If we as parents and teachers are to gather the most objectively beautiful things we have inherited from Western Civ, what then would we proceed to do with them? We would want not only to share them with our children and students, but also to have them imitate these works in their youth and later invent based upon what they have received. The Wiley Online Library describes, quote, in Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy, mimesis referred to how written and visual arts mimicked or imitated the world. The term, and its Latin equivalent imitatio, imitation, meant an author's conscious use of features and characteristics of earlier works to acknowledge indebtedness to past writers and artists. Imitation can be found in nearly all works by Greek and especially Roman authors and artists. Ancient theoretical discussions of imitation agree that good imitation required more than simple copying. An imitator was expected to emulate many models, join imitated material seamlessly to his own, reshape and vary it for new contexts, and improve upon it. End quote. Today's modern government schools place too much emphasis on invention and not enough on imitation. Placed into the context of classical learning, the grammar stage of imitation of beautiful art and music comes first. First, the copying by learning music theory and artistic terminology and skills. Later, in the dialectic and rhetoric stages, after the mastery of the basics, students are then ready for that true emulation of the greats, which takes what they have learned from the masters and incorporates their own ideas and skills into it. All this waxing eloquent about beauty begs the question, is it ever acceptable to expose our children and students to bad art? Art that is anything but beautiful? Human beings learn to be comfortable with and eventually love that which is familiar. Therefore, I want to surround my children with the good, true, and beautiful, so beautiful, true, and good things seem like home to them. I aim to listen to or look at something beautiful each day in order to specifically kindle an appreciation of beauty as an attribute of God, but also to normalize true beauty in general. Yet, there are situations in which it may be appropriate to expose older children to small doses of the bad, the false, and the ugly as they prepare to live in the world, but not of it. It's actually pretty easy in modern America to find bad art and awful music, especially after your students have had a decade or so of normalizing the beautiful. Finding and sharing negative examples of art in the pop culture can be a helpful talking point. And by this, I don't mean things that are inherently lewd or graphic. I just mean ugly. So there are two interesting movements, among other, in art history to explore with your children and students. One is called memento mori, and the other vanitas. Those of you who know a little Latin perceive that memento mori means remember, you must die, often using skulls or skeletons to make its point. And vanitas is a genre of art using objects as symbols to demonstrate Solomon's Ecclesiastes, the transience of life, the futility of pleasure, and the certainty of death. The idea of vanitas may appeal to teen students, draw them in, turn them toward the light when we teach in Christian schools and homeschools. Since we are surrounded by such a rampant culture of death with abortion, transgenderism, and suicide, knowing the idea of death has been wrestled with by humankind since the beginning helps one feel not so alone in one's pain. And this works well as long as we're also able to present the solution with a capital S to death and continue to normalize that which is truly beautiful. Now that we've developed a philosophy of beauty by looking to the ancient standard of objectivity, which reflects the Trinity, I'd like to share some ideas for building a morning meeting in your home or school. What is morning meeting? The irony of morning meeting is that it doesn't even have to take place in the morning. It's simply a planned meeting in your educational day in which you intentionally take time for wonder, awe, marvel, amazement, and contemplation. Sarah Mackenzie describes, quote, "It's simply a daily meeting incorporating subjects that are very important but which often get shuffled out of the schedule for logistical reasons. Based firmly on the idea that the purpose of education is to teach our children and students to love that which is lovely, it is a time set aside for contemplation and discussion that offers an opportunity for teachers and parents to connect children directly with beauty, art, poetry, and ideas that feed and nourish the soul. It's meant to be a predictable liturgy of love and beauty in your home or classroom. Mackenzie continues, it can be 20 minutes or 2 hours. Read scripture, recite poetry, read from a classic, look at a piece of great art and talk about it, then choose another book and read that. Drill your catechism, discuss what you read together, diagram a sentence together as a family. The key is that it happens regularly and takes priority over everything else. End quote. Morning meeting, whether it's in the morning or another time of day, is a time to observe, absorb, and take in beauty. Homeschool parents can do this as part of their curriculum. Classical school teachers can incorporate this as a moment in the school day, and parents whose children attend school can also incorporate this into their daily routine at home, like family devotions. Those of you who already have a great morning meeting or a schedule that's blessed to have chapel daily in the mornings at your school might consider instead putting morning meeting into the afternoon after a recess or lunch break. My objectives for my own morning meeting include a time for quiet contemplation, looking at something visually beautiful, examining primary sources, incorporating all ages who contribute in various age-appropriate ways, being exposed to the dates and eras of history, and incorporating what Stratford Caldecott describes as the basic skills of education and humanity, namely remembering, thinking, and speaking. Now that I've shared some definitional ideas for morning meeting, let's also consider what morning meeting is not. It is not a time that is specific for content that must be drilled or a recipe that must be followed. It's not a time for covering content in depth or for thorough instruction on a topic. It's not a replacement for religion class, hymnody, or memory work, though these can certainly be incorporated. It is not multum optimum, or more is better, but rather multum non multa, much not many. We don't want to let our ideas get the best of us so that we explore so many areas of beauty on the surface, but not dive into any of them deeply and richly. With these overarching ideas in mind, let's explore some possibilities for a beautiful morning meeting. I start with a theme for the year, or a monthly theme, often keyed to the historical period we are studying. Often I have a composer of the month, and we listen to a CD of the composer's best hits during morning meeting throughout the month, after first giving the piece a careful listening to appreciate it deeply. You might instead consider organizing your school months with themes of the 7 liberal arts, the 9 muses of Greek mythology, the 7 cardinal and theological virtues, or even a particular artist each month. With an overarching theme in mind, as well as the needs of my children and students, I like to incorporate some sort of recitation into the beginning of morning meeting. Sometimes that has included prayer requests for the needs of others. Other times we've recited timeline facts, periods of art or music history, math facts and skip counting, memory work or hymnody, or even poetry recitation. As recitation comes to a close, I transition into visual beauty each day. I used to look at a new piece of visual art daily, but have moved more into a philosophy incorporating about one new piece each week in order to facilitate deep observation rather than a quick surface glance of the art. In the past, I would choose pieces of fine art keyed to the time period we were studying in history. For instance, when we were studying the Middle Ages and the Reformation, each day we'd look at a piece of art, an art card that featured art from the Vatican. And the year we focused on American history, our daily dose of visual art came from an American artist such as John Copley, Currier and Ives, Winslow Homer, Grandma Moses, Frederick Remington, and Frank Lloyd Wright. I introduced the picture with as much information as I have in a compact way: the name of the work, the artist, the date of the work, the name of the particular school or genre. We try to simply be quiet and look at the work. Quote, "Silence is rare," Stratford Caldecott notes, and entertainment is all pervasive. The pressure to consume and discard is almost irresistible, end quote. And I would add that this is especially true in our age of technology, where we get so used to swiping and seeing visual things. It actually takes concentration and practice to look at something and train our brains to slow down. I think this is extremely healthy for children and adults, both. The practice of simply sitting quietly and observing serves as an antidote to a consume and discard society. After some time, maybe 20 or 30 seconds, I invite the children to share something they observed. I want to be clear that this is an invitation and not a requirement, and I leave the object of their observations open rather than asking specific trivia-like questions about what happens to be in the picture. I find it refreshing to hear what the children notice, and oftentimes it's something I didn't. As we have time, I might share something I noticed about the composition, colors, or style of the picture. For cycles through ancient or medieval history, you could consider looking at pictures of different genres of architecture, famous cathedrals or buildings, or stained glass windows. A discussion of classical art and sculpture really wouldn't be complete without some wrestling with the idea of nudity in art. The sets of art photography I have ordered over the years often include classical nudes. On the one hand, as an adult, I appreciate the beauty and order of the human form and don't find myself tempted toward lust while viewing tasteful classics. Again, I'm not talking about lewd sculpture or painting. But then on the other hand, I want to follow the advice of the Song of Solomon not to awake love before it desires with my children. I'd like to share a philosophy of nude art written by Mr. Kyle Yankee, teacher at Highlands Latin School in Kentucky and creator of Memoria Press's high school curriculum, Classical History of Art. Quote, students should live according to the fullness of their humanity, finding pleasure in what is truly beautiful as defined by the created nature of man and not the fallen. The potency of classical art to inspire this has made it an object of adoration throughout the history of the West. Yet pagan values have always posed a problem for Christian educators. An earnest study of classical art includes nudity. What are we to do with the nudity of Greek art? In addressing why the Greeks carved nudes, we should begin by asking why we are clothed. As Scripture makes clear, we are not clothed according to our creation, but according to our fall. Our garments signify our imperfection. Of course, we cannot go naked and deny our wrongs, yet we can deny no less our longing that those wrongs should be made right. This is the desire expressed in art, that we should be what we once were, naked and unashamed. And while Greek sculpture, being made of stone, cannot perfect the flesh, it can provide an illustrative image of our perfected state. Modern art emphasizes our material nature, rejecting classical assertions and stripping the human form of its divine image and its supremacy over the beasts. It reduces man to matter, which is nakedness indeed. Conversely, classical art comes much closer to our true nature as image bearers of our Creator. One who sees in such work only its literal nakedness fails to acknowledge its figurative sense and stumbles into the same rut that mires modernity. We were created to be naked, unashamed, and deathless. While goodness and truth lead us to life, it is beauty that makes us follow. Some works degrade our humanity, others elevate it. Classical art is our powerful ally in teaching the greatest virtue, that of proper love. End quote. I think it's an interesting philosophy to wrestle with, and of course, if you're homeschooling, speaking with your spouse as you educate your children, if you're a teacher, talking to your headmaster and pastor about these things, I would very much encourage that. Let me just share what I do in my home. I strike a sort of compromise and I hold the nude art card quite a distance from them as I explain the history, the artist, the background of the piece. And then I pass the card around, but allow them the option of not examining it. And almost always, the boys awkwardly pass really fast. When I'm teaching at a church or public co-op, I first crop the nude art to make it not naked. You see the face or whatnot. And I state that different families have different opinions, and I choose to be as conservative as possible so we can enjoy the work together. But if they want to see a fuller version, they can talk with their parents at home. So I hope that gives you some idea of how you might handle that, and as a springboard for a philosophy of nude art. Although most of my years doing morning meeting incorporated traditional art and painting, this year my definition has expanded. We looked at pictures of various breeds of birds instead of fine art. And we studied about God's artistic wonder in creating birds. I think expanding visual art into the realm of what we might consider nature or science has some great beauty, or great potential for beauty. So looking at a different species of tree each day, or a gemstone, or cloud formation, or flowers for an entire quarter or semester, and keying your visual arts with also the integration with science. We can spend time reflecting quietly on God's creation directly as an option for morning meeting. After all, Stratford Caldecott reminds us, quote, "The animals, plants, and minerals, the stars and elements were universally thought to praise their Maker, either simply by their very existence, or when called upon to do so by man, who gives them a voice they do not possess in themselves." End quote. Although you may have already shared the joy of singing during morning meeting, during recitation, or a hymnody, there are a number of different options for incorporating music into your routine. Younger children might easily absorb music theory with clapping rhythmic patterns, or learning to recognize a pitch on the staff each week. Nearly all children enjoy participating in rhythm instrument exercises or learning to read notes with elementary handbells. You could study different composers, and however you might incorporate it, music brings so much joy and beauty into daily life. I like to incorporate recitation, visual art, and music each day, each and every day, into morning meeting, but generally I tack on one other subject at the end of each day of the week. On Mondays, we might study a poem in depth. Tuesday, we might draw a world landmark or a geographical phenomena. On Wednesday, we might diagram a sentence from the Bible together. Perhaps on Thursday, we work on copywork, which has some great potential avenues for beauty, with practicing our best handwriting, a beautiful quotation that you can copy down, lovely paper to write it on, even learning calligraphy like we do at Mount Hope Lutheran School. Generally on Fridays, we complete an art theory lesson as well as a project, often aiming to imitate a beautiful, well-known work of art. Other ideas for a once-a-week inclusion in morning meetings might include the study of Greek or Latin root words, biographies of famous people, especially the artist or composer of the month, or even mathematical concepts. Although the idea of incorporating mathematical concepts to morning meeting is pretty new to me, I'm convinced of it after reading Beauty for Truth's Sake. The author writes, quote, "Since the Logos is love, and since all things are created through him and for him and are held together in him, we should expect the logic, the rationality, the intelligibility of the world to usher in the delight that beauty bestows. The beautiful meaningfulness of a numberly world is most evident in the perception of harmony, whether in music, architecture, or physics." End quote. Whether you bring symbolic associations of natural numbers, symmetry, mathematical formulae, or concepts like Fibonacci sequence, ideas that introduce math as beauty to our children are countless. The morning meeting topics that rotate by the day of the week seem to change each year as I reflect upon what is important to me and what my children or students would benefit from exposure to, as well as what I have time for. Time, both for the planning and executing of morning meeting, is finite. Whether your schedule allows a lot of time or just a little bit of time for looking at beautiful things, we can, as Sarah Mackenzie writes, quote, recognize all the small moments throughout our day for what they are, the makings of a cathedral of timeless beauty, the planting of seeds that will bear fruit in their season, end quote. When incorporating morning meeting into your day, not only do you have however long that session lasts to dwell upon beauty, you can also look forward to the next week, the next month, the next year, and the rest of eternity to delve into God's beauty. To the end of giving you some concrete ideas for how morning meeting has worked for my family in the past, on the back of your handout, there are some ideas and sample schedules. Although I give times for the various activities, these are approximations, and one activity usually flows right into the next naturally, rather than according to a clock. So I'll just talk through these rather quickly, but mainly I put them there to send them home with you to think about. But in 2020, you can see we started with an American history morning meeting, 45 minutes long in my homeschool day. We started with prayer and recitation. We practiced a Greek or Latin root word. We passed around our art card, made our observations. We listened to music from an American composer. And then we finished our chunk of time each day with reading a biography while the children colored a picture of the composer. We, on Tuesdays, studied a poem in depth. Wednesday, sketched out a continent. Thursday, diagrammed some sentences. Friday, did our art history and skills. You can see 2 years later, a similar design with some tweaks for content and what we completed. Also, I moved it to a different time of our day. That worked better for our family. And even though this next schedule isn't on your handout, I wanted to share how I tried to incorporate the beauty of music into a public school home education hybrid co-op where I taught. I know that sounds weird. If you're curious, let me know. I'll tell you more about it. And so at this public school homeschool hybrid, I was teaching students who had no prior musical experience. And I introduced the class with a secular song that we sang together. We did clapping patterns, and I introduced a tempo or a dynamic each time. We repeated that rhythm with musical rhythm instruments. We covered very, very basic music theory by covering a new concept each week, like what a time signature was, what a measure is, what a whole note is, a whole rest. We practiced different pitches and learning what those looked like on the staff. We played hitting handbells, which are pretty fun to play together. And then each week we listened to one work from a famous composer, and I had a worksheet printed out from classicsforkids.com. So they would work on the worksheet while we listened to the music. So we've just discussed a variety of good ways to build your own morning meeting. Next, let's identify some practical resources for implementing your vision. I've created a web page you can visit with direct links to many of the resources I brought along today to share, and even more on the website than I could fit in my bag and in my car on the way here. You can also check out the QR code. I've never really done a QR code before this conference, so maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But in any case, my website's down at the bottom of your page. It works?
Yep.
Nice, awesome. So if you're curious and want to browse those, you sure can. There's just a few things I want to point out, and that is for art cards or daily visual art, there are a lot of great resources out there. Many Bible history books do a fine job with their art, but history has also produced many great works of sacred art. So it's easy to Google and find public domain images of Bible stories. You might be interested in doing that for students. And there are also some great coloring sheets of the famous works. I have one printed out back there. You can actually find a lot for free online. Memoria Press has some great art cards and posters as well. I recently became introduced to the Simply Charlotte Mason picture study portfolios, which I haven't seen in person, but I think I might like them even better online from what I've seen. You can also search online by artists for postcard sets, And sometimes those are cheaper, like by artist, if you wanted to find Vincent van Gogh, you find a set of his postcards, and then you wouldn't have to necessarily pay as much as you might for a whole curriculum. You can also create your own art cards from art in the public domain. I did this for Advent a few years back, where we looked at a different scene of the Nativity by a famous classical artist each day in Advent, and that was really a neat thing to do. I also have a list of questions for visual art observation on my website if that's of interest to you. As far as art projects go, I really enjoyed the Discovering Great Artists series by Mary Ann Cole. I have one example of that back there. It gives a short biography of an artist. It gives you an art project to do based on the artist's own work. So that's a mimesis happening. As far as geography goes, I have a few curricula I've written that are available on LutheranHomeschool.com. We have a poetry book over here done by Pastor Andrew Richard, my pastor at Mount Hope, one of them. Poems for Lutheran Homes and Schools. Just read a poem each day. Analyze it if you have extra time. So that's a wonderful resource. And then some other ideas. One year we did a saint celebration each week based on the William Whedon book, Saint Celebrations. We took time, I think it was Monday at the end of morning meeting to go through that. And lots of other art and music educational resources on the blog. So I hope that what you have seen here today, and feel free to browse some more, can kind of whet your appetite and give you some ideas for so many options that there are for morning meeting. So today we've discussed a philosophy of beauty. We've brainstormed ways of implementing a beautiful morning meeting in your home or school, and we've looked at some resources for doing so. I hope and pray you have come across some inspiring ideas that you'll consider implementing after listening to this presentation. But instead, if you feel inadequate or overwhelmed by all of these options, shift your attention away from the burden of you creating beauty in your home or classroom, and instead onto the one who has created you and calls you beautiful. More beautiful than anything we can implement in our homes and classrooms is the image of the heavenly wedding. As I began, I will now finish with a quotation from Reverend Carnell in his Christian Culture article. Quote, "In our Lutheran churches today, and I would add our homes and schools, we have a unique opportunity to re-anchor beauty in God in a threefold sense, which corresponds to our creed. The first is that we must remember that beauty is objective in the sense that all truly beautiful things participate in God's beauty. So things are only beautiful insofar as they reflect the splendor of God's truth and goodness. The second thing to remember is that beauty is not merely in the eye of the beholder, but that we are in the eyes of the beholder. He who sees all things and makes them beautiful in their time. God looks upon us as his beautiful bride, though we deserve nothing at all. Finally, the Holy Spirit makes all our vocational works beautiful, though they are often ugly in the eyes of the world. As we contemplate the beauty of God's creation and embrace the beauty that God gives to us, we also bear the beauty of the Lord in our works and duties. You are precious in his eyes, and he makes you into a crown of beauty, a royal diadem before all the nations." End quote. I would like us to be able to get into some small groups. I have some discussion prompts, I think, at the bottom. Table talk number 6, your turn. Personal obstacles with incorporating morning meeting, favorite resources, how you might handle nude art. I'm also going to maybe be floating around as you talk about these things. You can catch me if you have any questions. A reminder, it's 4:11. This session has 19 more minutes to it. And then at 4:30, you're welcome to go even they're going already. But by 4:30, we should be moving on to get to Vespers today. So thank you. So if you haven't already made a friend next to you, introduce yourself, talk about your discussion problems. Okay. Yeah,
I have a question about the public school homeschool co-op. Do you
Yes.
just mean secular, or is it actually connected to a public school?
So I was employed part-time by a school district which partnered with a private company to connect home educating families with the public schools. So the homeschooling families signed away their rights to be independent. They got money in exchange, but they had to meet state standards. So one day a week, they could go to this co-op, which was like drop-off babysitting with education. The other days of the week, they could work on these basically computer modules to show that they were learning, and then for the rest of the time, their parents could teach them whatever they wanted. And so I was employed by a school district, but I taught homeschooling families, and basically I was a resource for families as they had questions or wanted to know about curriculum, and then they could drop their kids off, and I taught there, and they could also use, it was $1,000 per child they could use toward curriculum in their home.
Why would a district spend money on that? Is it because state accountability?
Gold shop.
Because they get no money
Vespers.
if a student is homeschooling from the state, but they get probably $10,000 to $20,000 a child if that child is on their roster.
So they found a way to roster them,
Yeah,
but
it's
have them
tricky.
almost.
It's tricky. Yeah, God bless you. Thanks for coming. Yeah, it was
Interesting.
a tangled web, to say the
I
least.
had never heard of
Yeah,
that.
but it was a neat thing to be part of. I met a lot of great families and enjoyed using my teaching license a little bit.
Where did you get your teaching degree from?
From Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And God bless you. I'd love to see you next year.
Yes, I hope to be there. I hope there's a lot of Wells people, so we'll see what happens.
Do it.
Get it out there. All right.
Oh, there she is. I was hoping you'd find one walk to chapel with you.
How are you?
We were passing through the building and I thought, well, wait, maybe you're still in the room, then we go on together.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I was in my meeting the whole time.
Yeah,
But how did it go?
really well. Yeah, there were
Well,
45 people here.
Really? That's a good group.
Great engagement.
Yeah.
A lot of people seemed happy to talk about things. I think she's with
This was
Grace.
the morning meeting sort of stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. What about, you talked about nudity and artwork and that sort of thing.
Sounds
Was there any Q&A about that?
I said, that they should get into small groups, and if they had questions, I was gonna float around, but nobody brought them. Oh, actually, someone said they have leaf stickers,
Oh.
and so they just put the leaf
Leaf stickers.
sticker over the. There are, I have a little bit
You
more
did that in
things
one of our
together.
photo books, I remember. You
Yeah, I
some
did.
fountain in, not Paris, but what's that other place called?
I
in
told them,
Paris?
the guy in this room before me got done super early, so I just set stuff up. And as
Oh.
people had extended break, they just came in and I said, you can look at this stuff, and they were taking pictures, writing stuff down.
Oh,
Where
okay.
did you
So I'm
sit?
glad I
Do you
did
have
bring them.
the actor and all that? Do you need help?
Yeah, I do.
Mom, where did you sit?
I'll probably bring it by the car. What time is it? Is it chapel service?
We've got 10 minutes to jump.
Oh, great, there's Emerson.
Yeah.
Did your meeting go okay?
We're still interpreting it.
Okay.
Maybe. Let's put it this way.
I was in the front. I got to give the speech.
My district president tells me to hold the course.
Okay.
That's